just that one pill. He took one lace pill, and that's all it took to kill him.
How do you get sober while grieving the loss of a loved one? After losing his brother Chase to a fatal fentanyl overdose, Parker Ellison had to find the answer for himself. He's our guest on this episode of Silver Ladder.
You're listening to Silver Ladder, a podcast built on real-life, inspiring stories of those who have faced and overcome challenges related to mental health, addiction and recovery, grief, parenting, and much more. Real, raw, relatable. Silver Ladder.
Welcome to Silver Ladder. I'm Shane Watson, mental health educator and consultant. Before we meet today's guest, it's important to note the Silver Ladder podcast may contain mature content, including explicit language and references to topics such as drug use, suicide, or violence. This show is intended for adults only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by guests of the show are their own and not necessarily the views of the host. Sharing them does not constitute an endorsement by the Silver Ladder Podcast or Silver Ladder LLC. Likewise, nothing shared on the show is intended to replace professional advice. As always, consult your physician, attorney, licensed counselor, and local record store owner before making any personal changes or decisions. Our guest today is Parker Ellison. Parker is a digital marketer, former DJ, servant of Jesus, recovering addict, and grief battler. He joins us now on Silver Ladder. Parker, welcome to the show, and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
When I share and I tell and I listen to stories of recovery and people overcoming some of the obstacles that you've overcome, I think it's really important for people to recognize that individuals in recovery are from all walks of life. They don't come from a specific certain kind of background. There's still that myth hanging on with some people. So for you, let's start at the beginning. How does your story begin? Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? And what was life like for you as a kid?
Well, I was born and raised here in Scottsdale, Arizona, May 1st of 1999. Shortly after my birth, I moved with my mom to San Diego, California. I was there for about a year and a half. Growing up as a kid, I've experienced separation between my mom and my dad really early on. So I wasn't sure if it was normal to be in a completely different state while my dad was still home. But then I moved back when I was like 2 or 3 and then continued to remain in Scottsdale for the rest of my life. So growing up as a kid, I don't know if this is a complete trauma response, but I wish I could go into the depths of like way back in the past of what life was like as a kid. But I think I had a relatively normal life that any other kid growing up in the suburbs would have. You know, friends with the neighbors across the street and in the block, cul-de-sac parties, and from what else I can remember, you know, I think I had a relatively normal childhood growing up. So,
and that's important for people to hear because like I said before I asked you that question, even in 2025, I still run into some people that when it comes to their own kids, they disconnect from the possibility that they need to protect their kids against mental and behavioral health challenges because they say, well, you know, our family is in a nice neighborhood. We're loving parents. We, you know, those types of things. And it allows people to mentally disconnect from that and say, well, we're not like that. It's so important for you just said, you know, in my mind, I basically had a pretty normal childhood. So you mentioned what your childhood was like. What were you like as a kid?
I was a pretty timid kid for some odd reason. I don't know why I was, but anything that I tried to do that was remotely difficult, it would end up with me in tears. I don't know where that insecurity spawned from, but you know, I remember being 4 years old, my mom put me on the soccer team. I couldn't kick the ball and I cried. I sat on the soccer ball. Same with T-ball. I couldn't swing. I swung the bat, missed, cried about it. So I don't know where that sensitivity came from, but I remember being just a very sensitive kid. I had some childhood friends that were across the street from me, and you know, we got along really well, but there was also this kind of like unspoken rivalry to where they would beat me at everything. They beat me to the bus stop. They were better at me at Halo 3. They always just wanted to be first, and for some reason, I was just a very vulnerable person to kind of be like, not the punching bag, because that seems a little bit melodramatic of a term to call myself, but I definitely was that kid that was kind of lower in the friendship hierarchy, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, that's what caused me to be such a timid kid. But other than that, I mean, my parents would tell me that I was sweet. I loved my family. I loved my brothers and sisters, and I tried to find myself getting along with people, and I don't know. I think I liked things what other kids liked. I liked Pokemon. I liked Legos, and I would believe that there wasn't any other niche things that made me really stand out from, growing up as a kid. So going back to what you were saying about the normalcy of just like being a kid in the suburbs, you wouldn't think that there's any kind of like disruptancy to how a kid grows up. I had it all pretty much. So
now, when you mentioned some of the normalcy about growing up, you mentioned your siblings, your brothers and sisters. In interviewing you today, we're actually telling two intersecting stories. One is yours, and the other is the story of your brother Chase, which we will get into greater detail on as we go along. You're the big brother. How old were you when Chase was born, and what do you remember about your childhood with him? What was he like?
He was born October 27th, 2002. I was 3 years old. So like 3.5 years older than him. And, man, I loved him. I didn't call him Chase. I called him brother all the time. So we had this bond. We always enjoyed the same things. We loved, Star Wars. We loved, fighting each other with little plastic lightsabers, and, he loved Indiana Jones. And so we got along by liking the same things. We would play things like Lego Star Wars together. Him and I had a really good relationship growing up. Sure, like siblings are bound to like get all head to head with each other at times. Yep. It's inevitable, but at the same time, like at the end of the day, like we loved each other a lot. We did a lot of the same things together. So, yeah, we had a really good, childhood growing up together.
What did you love and appreciate most about Chase?
This is more so in regards to his later years of life, but as tough as he tried to work, there was always this facade that he put on that made him seem super tough, like he can handle things on his own, and like he's just this bulletproof kind of guy. He had such like a tender heart, and so he's always had that growing up, and I just appreciate that we enjoyed the same things together too. But underneath all that, that pain and hurt which he's gone through, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, there's just this need to just like be tender and soft to people, especially to our little sister Sadie as well. He had a heart for her.
Some of the most tenderhearted people do put on that proverbial armor the most, because by being tenderhearted, they are affected by things in a really deep way. And so some of the people that on the exterior that you meet, as you know, from talking about your brother, that have that appearance of being tough or nothing gets to me, everything just slides off my back, inside there, they have a tender heart for other people, and then therefore also can be wounded themselves through things like that.
Agreed.
Well, you mentioned a little while ago when I asked you about what you were like as a kid, you talked about the separation early on. You talked about being a timid kid, having some insecurity. I don't know if any of this led to what I'm about to ask you, but it's so important to understand in a recovery story, people talk about that last day. They talk about the rock bottom and how everything ended, and that's important, but we need to talk about how things began. If we're going to look at preventing youth from using substances, we need to understand the motivations in the first part. What led you to drink or use for the first time? How old were you? What did that look like? And then what was the substance?
I must have been about 15 probably 15 or 16. It must have been my sophomore year. I don't know exactly what led me to it. Obviously, I mean, at that age, my parents got divorced in 2011. And so their first year of divorce was fine. They were civil. And then all of a sudden there was just this clash. There's this huge clash. So the last thing I wanted to do was be in the middle of that, was to be at home and experience the hurt and the pain that happens with that kind of separation. So I was just trying to be out of the house all the time. And so I had a solid group of friends around that age in high school where, I had a buddy named Jack who, lived off of Shane, the 101 in McCormick Ranch. And he had a garage that was kind of like his man cave.
The spot.
He had the spot, and we were just like an innocent group of friends that were just, we would ride our bikes and skateboards to the grocery store or the gas station, get snacks, and then just watch funny things on YouTube and just chat it up. And then as time progressed, like more and more friends got introduced to that friend group. So I remember there was this one like really weird environment for my first drink. My first substance was alcohol. It was a bottle of Jack or Captain Morgan. It was in the sewer tunnel off of Scottsdale and Thunderbird, right next to that little bus station. You know where that is? Yeah, there's this one tunnel that was a low-key spot that not a lot of people knew unless it was a word of mouth thing. So that was like a place where kids could do anything without any accountability. So I remember, my first sip of alcohol was there. And what led me, there wasn't really any motivation behind it other than like, I was actually thinking about this after you sent me those questions. It was probably like just a socially accepted thing. I didn't really think much about it. I was kind of a sheltered kid growing up, and I was very innocent. I didn't know a lot of, I didn't have a lot of exposure to these things. So I didn't really understand the dangers behind it, especially when you're drinking at such a young age. So, I think that goes back to my childhood friends of like me kind of being on the lowest of the low in the hierarchy of friends and wanting to find that acceptance up there. So I felt like, oh man, maybe if I do this, maybe my friends will hang out with me more. So I think it was that peer pressure, I guess, into just wanting to be accepted into a circle.
It's peer pressure, but it's subtle.
Yeah.
It's not the way they portray it in public service announcements on commercials. Like people are like, if you don't drink this, we're never going to hang out with you again. It's subtle. It's kind of unstated, but it's understood that it's there. And oddly enough, that's the exact reason that I used alcohol for the first time. I had a friend over for the weekend. And we stole alcohol that belonged to my parents because I thought not only is he going to be impressed by me doing this, he's going to tell other kids at school when we go back to school on Monday. And that's how my reputation is going to be made. And it was with the same exact substance. And when you drank for the first time, did it click for you right away? Did it feel like you had found a solution or something that had been missing? How did it feel that first time?
That first time, I really thought nothing much about it. Most of what my thoughts were at that time was, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Sure. My mom she has this saying that you're only as good as the secrets that you keep. And it obviously didn't take long for me to keep that secret because I sucked at lying. So my first thought was, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Like, what are the consequences of my actions? So I'm glad that I had that conviction early hand. So it didn't really click to me at first. It wasn't like any kind of like magic solution to all my problems.
So do you know anything about Chase's experience, specifically when he started, why, and with what? You may or may not know those details.
Unfortunately not. He was a lot better at keeping those secrets than I was. Like, I remember being in my junior or senior year of high school, and he was in 8th grade at the time, and he was telling me like he was smoking weed. I was like, dude, what? I never knew this about you. The fact that he was so subtle and just so nonchalant about it, it caught me by surprise. So I wish I knew more about it, but what could have caused it? Man, there's many reasons, but I don't know those.
Where did it go from there for you? So you had that first drink, and it was more of it sounds like partially curiosity and partially wanting to impress your friends. You said it didn't click right away. You didn't have that feeling like, oh, I've found what I've been looking for. It scratched the itch that's always been there. So where did it go from there for you? What did your progression look like? What did you move on to? Was it gradual? Was it rapid? What was that like?
Well, I'll tell you what the end result is first. It definitely turned into an everyday substance of just numbing myself. But it was a very slow snowball effect at first.
And this was with alcohol?
Yes,
Okay.
alcohol. And then, I would go to parties like at least once a month because that was common in high school. I didn't really drink as much because, being a child of divorced parents going back and forth, it was very two distinct households. My mom made sure that I was very protected. She wouldn't let me go out past like 10:30 p.m. My dad it was very easy to get underneath his nose because he had kind of a relatively close childhood growing up as well. Like I would say the addiction gene comes from his side of the family.
Okay.
So yeah, it was just very easy to get underneath his nose about a lot of things. So when on the weekends that I'm with my dad, I would definitely spend a lot more time with my friends. And so a little bit about my story too. Like there was just a lot of confusion in the divorce as well, to where I was deceived into thinking like my mom was, this terrible person. She was this tyrant that just wanted control over me and I couldn't grow up, be like a normal kid. And obviously none of that was true. She grew up with, my grandpa, I call him my Papa, one of the greatest guys ever. Really solid pastor. He pastored a church in San Diego for 50 years until like 2015. And so, the word of God has been something that has floated around house to house a lot, but it just never really clicked to me. But she was very obedient to the commandments and how to, lead scripturally. And I looked at that as like, oh, okay, so this is all about rule following. I was obviously a very rebellious child and didn't want anything to do with any kind of order or rule following. And so when I was 16, I was like, you know what, Mom, I'm going to go live with my dad for full time. I'm not going to go back and forth between all of this family court stuff and all this just back to back. And that was just me not being real with myself. Like, oh, you just want to go and just break all the rules all the time. That's ultimately what it was in disguise. So I was living with my dad full time at 16, and I was making some pretty questionable friend choices with who I was spending time with. So, I was still hanging out with my solid core group of friends. I was dating this girl in high school. She would, get me to sneak out of the house at times, and we would go and drink and stuff. And so, the amount of, or the character of the people that I eventually started hanging out with started to become gradually less and less morale, I guess. And eventually, that led me to, or more context, I really liked electronic dance music growing up. I discovered Skrillex once when I was 12 years old, and that clicked something in my brain. And I was like, I'm going to listen to this for the rest of my life. And I was looking at videos at like 14 years old of EDC, Electric Daisy Carnival, and thinking, wow, this is so cool. The rave scene must be so fun. But little did I know, because of how naive I was, how tainted with sin that whole scene is, because there's ecstasy, Molly, acid, all of those psychedelics, along with plenty of alcohol and marijuana abuse as well. And I didn't know that. So I thought that whole thing was super cool. And I like to say that like sin likes to make itself look attractive. It's a pig that puts on lipstick. And I was totally deceived by that. And so I didn't really have any of those friends growing up, especially in my teenage years, that liked the same music as me, because that was like my identity. I wanted to get into, producing music on like Ableton. And I got my first pair of like, mixing decks when I was 17. I really wanted to make that a career. And so going back to the whole wanting to fit in thing, it was really hard for me to want to fit in. So at that point, I remember it being like my senior year, and I was just feeling socially outcasted. And there was a summer where I would steal alcohol from my parents, and I'll be drinking alone in my bedroom while I was making music and stuff, like almost every night. And so it definitely turned into a numbing thing. And then the more and more I started meeting friends that actually enjoyed the same things as me, that's when it became an abuse problem, because they were abusing it as well. But I was so deceived, thinking like, oh, look at these people liking the same thing as me. For once, I'm going to spend as much time as I can with them.
I found my people.
My people. And so the people obviously were not healthy people to be around. You are who you hang out with. And It eventually led into stronger drug abuse where I was going from, drinking beers at parties every now and then to trying out marijuana and, doing that like every other week or something, to next thing you know, like every opportunity that you can to hang out with these people, you're drinking and smoking at the same time. And then there would be points where, let's do mushrooms and stuff just for the fun of it. And so it was a slow snowball effect, but then, I also look at it as like a Jenga tower too. You can only stack it so high until you realize like the destruction that you're causing on yourself by, continuing to surround yourself with these people who are influencing you to do such bad things, and, influencing you to thinking that, oh, like LSD is okay to do. It's like something to unlock your mind or whatever. It's, I don't know, this whole, like the hippie generation never left. It's wearing different clothes today. So,
and this is all as a teenager too.
Yeah,
your brain's not even fully developed at this point.
Yeah, I remember trying mushrooms at 16 years old and thinking like, oh, I'm like the god of space and time or whatever, because that stuff is really deceiving, and there's something demonic about it in my opinion. I could be called superstitious, but, like Ephesians 6 says, for we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but against powers over this present darkness. And, like, I think that there is something demonic about that kind of stuff that makes you turn away from God. And so, yeah, I mean, it was it wasn't frequent at all from like 15, 16, 17. And then the latter half of being 17 into like 18, 19 years old, it was as frequent as I could possibly make it. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned a couple things earlier that I want to hone in on. It's important for people listening, especially parents, to understand this. Mm-hmm. One, you mentioned the genetics of addiction. Mm-hmm. For you parents out there listening, if the genetics of addiction run in your family, your children, if they use, they're at much greater risk of becoming a problematic user, becoming addicted, etc. Genetics is one of the biggest determining factors. Age of onset is another one as well. You also mentioned another thing that's important. You talked about the difference in the two households.
Yeah.
And another thing I want to emphasize to any parents listening to this, if you are separated, if you are divorced, if you cannot stand your ex, for the sake of your children, if you can agree on one thing, please let it be consistency in the rules, the values, the guidelines between your two households. You're doing it for the sake of your children. Mm-hmm. Even if it's hard for you to be diplomatic with your ex, you are doing it for that child that needs you for everything. Mm-hmm. So you talked about your the development here, how it kind of grew. You said around 17, 18 really started taking off. When you look back now, do you feel like there was anything that someone around you could have done at that point to stop you from heading in that direction or help you? Would you have listened? Is there something they could have done? And if so, what?
I didn't really have that voice of reason. Sure, I remember being, just barely turned 16 and going to church camp in Point Loma Nazarene University. And that's when I accepted Jesus as my savior. So I had this hedge of protection over me, but I didn't really understand who Jesus was. My church growing up didn't really do a good job teaching that, so I didn't really understand what repentance and sanctification really meant. So I just thought, okay, like, I'm saved, I get to go to heaven. I wrote I signed my name on the contracts.
I can do whatever I want.
Exactly. Okay. Growing up, I didn't really understand what the abuse of grace meant, obviously, until recently. So, no, I didn't really have that voice of reason. I remember having a really bad LSD trip that led me to the hospital to get 3 doses of anesthesia. Apparently, the first 2 didn't take me down because I was that manic and that far off. Like, I don't remember any of that. I went in and out of hallucinations, and that will be a story for another time,
okay.
to say the least. And so finally, like my dad, who, believed in Jesus, but didn't really go to church, only on like Easter and Christmas. Like, he even told me, like, dude, you need to get right with God. There is something incredibly wrong with you, and there's something that's spiritually not right about you. And so I can only do as much as I can as a parent, but the rest is all up to you, between you and Jesus. And so that was kind of like my wake up call or part of my wake up call. There's this parable called the prodigal son in the Gospels of like how a young man took his father's inheritance that he gave him and he ran off to do his own thing with it and, did a lot of sinful things. Like I did that multiple times actually. So that was my first prodigal son moment where I came back and, I after that whole LSD thing, I was still hanging out with those friends. And, also my dad told me when, there's like something not right about me, I need to get right with God. He also like laid down the law and said like, you can't be hanging out with these people anymore. If you continue to hang out with them, there's going to be major consequences. Me being stubborn, I have to touch a hot pan more than once to figure out that it's hot. I was continuing to hang out with those people because that is where I felt like I belonged the most, simply because of a niche interest that I had, and I just wanted to be seen and accepted for it. I continued to hang out with those friends. I wasn't doing like hard psychedelics, but was still doing cocaine, still smoking a lot of weed and getting drunk as much as I can. I was still doing that. And so my dad found out and he kicked me out. I went to my mom's house because I didn't know where else I could go. So that was kind of her and mine reconciliation, because there was a lot of harbored unforgiveness that where I know she would forgive me for betraying her and for running away from her when she was just trying her best to be a mother. But that was kind of our reconciling moment. And I stayed at her house, and then I was just going through terrible withdrawals. And so she took me to Banner Health, where I like to call it adult timeout for comedic sake. I spent 5 days in a rehabilitation center, and then they both visited me, my mom and my dad. That was probably the first time I've seen them in the same room together since that was 2018. So it's been 7 years since I've seen them in the same room together. They said, Parker, we're going to get you help. You're going to go to this place in Florida called Honey Lake. It was a rehabilitation center that was Christ-centered. So that was also a voice of reason, more like a place of reason as well. But going back to your original question, and then, yeah, I didn't really have that voice of reason, along that path of, that path of sin and destruction that I was perpetuating on myself. I wish I did, but I was just too stubborn to be receiving of any kind of guidance to lead me to a better place.
And that's not uncommon at that age, when you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof and you know everything and nobody can tell you anything. You said something really important when you talked about your dad telling you not to go hang out with those people anymore, and you went back and you did it again. You said, because I felt seen and accepted. Mm-hmm. And that's so important for people to understand, that when they're looking for something to replace addiction, genuine connection, genuine acceptance with healthy people around you is so crucial. And you were looking for that in a place that wasn't healthy for you, but what you were seeking was completely understandable. As human beings, we want to be seen, we want to be accepted, we want to feel like we're being heard.
Yeah.
So you talked about this progression where you're at. As things were progressing with you, did you see Chase on a similar path? Did you see anything moving forward? You mentioned earlier him telling you he had been smoking weed when he was like in 8th grade, and you were like, I had no idea. You hit it really well. Mm-hmm. As this story goes on, did you see a progression in his use, and what did that look like?
Not his use, but definitely his state of mind. I saw a lot of depression in him. I remember coming home from tripping one night, and I saw him in his bedroom listening to there's this rapper, he's dead now, named Lil Peep. It was very
he died in Tucson.
Yes, Tucson. Chase was supposed to go to that concert when he was performing in Tucson, and he didn't get to go, unfortunately. And it was of the same reason that Chase died, fentanyl. Mm-hmm. So I remember coming home and seeing Chase passed out on his bed with cuts all over his arms, he was asleep, but still blasting Lil Peep in his headphones. And it's just I never liked his music because you can really identify with the music that you listen to. So like I'm a big Radiohead fan.
I love Radiohead.
Same here.
OK Computer, especially.
Yes, but it's very just nihilistic. Or Tom York has a very nihilistic point
very
of view
much
on
so.
anything.
Yes, not exactly happy music.
Yeah, still I cannot deny that he's a great artist.
Excellent.
He is. Excellent.
And lyricist.
And so, yeah, because Chase was identifying so much with that kind of like sad or quote unquote sad boy type persona, he really gave into that mindset. And so like the cuts were so big and so deep, like I think he passed out because of the pain. And so it just broke my heart. There was
Did you know prior to that he had been self-injuring, or is that when you found that out?
That was the first time I found that out.
Okay.
Yeah. And so like I just broke down in tears. Him and I loved The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd.
Another great album.
Right. That was kind of like my Bible when I was going through my hippie phase, because it just teaches you like, or, you know, the band thought like nothing matters. Everything that you say and you do has no value. And so, that gave me an excuse to like identify that and live freely without any accountability or consequences. But, you know, we had this saying like, we'll see you on the dark side of the moon. And so I wrote him a note and I told him like, hey, like you and we're in this together. If you need me, like,
awesome,
let me know. And so like, I don't just pain me so much. And like, he's my brother. I didn't want to see him. Like, sure, I've been through seasons of self-harm as well. Cause my depression has been that far before. Glory to God that I'm still here today, because, there's been plenty of things that I could have done to kill myself. But so, yeah, I didn't recognize the signs beforehand. It just happened to be like a wrong place at the wrong time type moment where he was just there vulnerable in that state of just pain and anguish, and I didn't know what to do about it. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't really get to see much else of the choices that he was making growing up, because he was kind of a simple kid. He liked football, but he also did play a butt ton of video games and a butt ton of Call of Duty. That was his safe space, and there was never not a time where the Xbox wasn't on. So, yeah, that's where I saw him doing a lot of those things. But I guess it must have been the friends that he was hanging out with as well. So, and I know his friends, like he's had some loyal friends that I still keep up with every now and then, and so it's cool to see them grow up. But I don't know if it was just innocent kids getting exposed to what the world offers, and so I guess he was also deeply affected by my parents' divorce and just being in between all of that, hearing your mom say this about your dad, hearing your dad say this about your mom, it must have affected him a lot as well too. So otherwise, I wish I would have seen more of the signs, and that's, you know, part of grief talking is saying, oh, I wish I could have done this, or I wish I could have done
Hindsight
this.
being 20/20.
Exactly.
But you were fighting your own battle at that time too.
Exactly.
And you were young at that time also, young and inexperienced. And I love the fact that you left him that note though. Did he ever take you up on the opportunity to talk? A lot of times guys, especially young guys, won't take someone up on that offer.
No, he didn't. We had this understanding, like we're brothers and like we're in this together, and like we can lean on each other when needed. It was known,
okay.
But we didn't really have those intimate conversations before. But there was just this this unspoken mutual understanding of the bond that we have.
You know, and I think that that's such an important thing to hit on as we're doing this episode as part of Men's Mental Health Month. You know, that thing there where I want to encourage the men and the young men hearing this to understand that if someone like you gives an offer like that, take that opportunity to open up. You know, It can be nerve-wracking. It's intimidating. It takes guts to speak up again, especially as guys. We tend to stuff things down. We act like it's not happening, you know, but we look back at all those different things, like you said, and that grief and that loss, it makes you say, you know, what could have been done differently? But to your credit, you wrote that letter and said, I am here. Like, if you want to talk to me, you know, I'm available.
Yeah. I want to bounce off of that because I think it's so important for men I think that one of the strongest things that men can do especially in today's society where it's quote unquote emasculating to be vulnerable with your emotions. I completely disagree with that. I think one of the manliest things a man can do is embrace and understand the emotions that he's going through, not suppress it, but expose it, bring it to light in a healthy way. Sure, like it doesn't mean by going to therapy and just talking to a shrink the whole time, but it can, like, there's community. There's a reason why God says, like, do not forsake the gathering of fellow brothers and sisters. Like, we have, there's churches, but there's also other organizations out there that allow people to really speak on what they're going through. And not only that, like, it's super important to not silo yourself, but to develop like long lasting friendships built on trust, to where, you can have that strengthening of one another by carrying each other's burdens too. Like that's biblical right there. So it sucks to see that, it's uncommon right now for men to really be vulnerable.
Very uncommon. But the good thing is, as time goes on, as people more openly speak about mental health and their own challenges and overcoming them, the more time progresses, the more that it does become socially acceptable. If this was the 1950s right now, no way is that going to happen. You don't ever talk about anything like that. And nothing in life, no problem gets better by us not talking about it.
Agreed.
We can't just pretend that something's not there and it's magically going to go away. As a guy myself, I understand how it's tough to bring yourself to that point to speak up, but good comes from that as well. So did you start seeing consequences, like at this point in the story? Did you start suffering consequences as a result of your use? If so, what were they? Like, I mean, you talked about some of them earlier, but were you paying a price at this point, or was it something where you're like, no, I'm getting away with it right now?
There's internal and there's external consequences. True. I'll start with the external. Sure. I got grounded for coming home high, and I was grounded from going to prom. I still went to prom, but I was grounded. Sure, I've had privileges taken away, like, no Xbox, no hanging out with friends. There were things like that, but as the use of harder substances grew stronger, there was a lot of internal consequences. The depression got worse. The deception got worse of, what I want to worship. I was more so atheistic or like agnostic in a way to where I thought, I can be my own God and not live with any accountability. Not only did addiction look like drugs and alcohol, it also looks like women as well. Like, I dated girl after girl after girl after girl in high school, and that was just another form of me wanting to be seen by someone, a special someone, and just be accepted for who I am. And so that is just a hole that continues to get deeper, because there's all this stuff creates a God-sized hole that only God can fill. And so there's just this chasm of continuing to just enlarge in, because I just felt that these things that the world offered would be the magic solution to all my problems. And so not only that, some of the other, I guess this is an external consequence as well, is like I went from friend group to friend group eventually, or like, yeah, I went to friend group because as I started to do harder things, my more innocent friends kind of subconsciously or like unspokenly like outcasted me in a way. And I think it's totally valid for them to do that in regards to their preservation as a friend group, because otherwise I don't want to be the problem child all the time. But yeah, there's just a lot of distrust between the relationships I've had with people as well, and as a result of the decisions I was making. But a lot of it was internal, and a lot of that came from the LSD and the mushrooms and the ecstasy that I was doing. It really it drilled a hole in my brain. And being in mind, like you said earlier, like you're still a developing child. You're still a developing young adult. Your brain doesn't stop until it's like what, 25, 26?
Yeah, 25 or older.
Yeah, I just turned 26. So I'm living with the scars of that. Sure, like God can miraculously heal. We see that in the Gospels. And so I don't doubt that he's not doing that, because he is, but I couldn't form a coherent sentence. I couldn't be attentive or also just be awake all the time. I was trying to find that fix to, otherwise I would have these aches, these pains, these I don't know. It was just, the worse and worse it get, the more and more I started to isolate myself too. So that was also a consequence of my actions. And so that longing of acceptance continued to grow deeper and deeper. Along with that, so did the depression. So yeah, I think it's just important for those who are in recovery or who are facing addiction right now to really like zoom out and take a look of like, what would happen if I did this to my family, to my friends, to myself, to my work, to my business, to my hobbies, all of that. For every action that there is a consequence to it. So
I say that when I share my story at schools, one thing that I explain to students is there is a consequence. There is a price to pay for every negative or unhealthy decision we make, but we don't always see it right away. And sometimes we don't realize what that consequence is until years down the road. I know people that have used a variety of substances, and because they didn't get arrested, they didn't overdose, they didn't lose their job, they convince themselves there's no price to pay for this. Yeah. This is totally fine for me to do. And it's not till years down the road that they realize, wow, I am in deep. And they find out that there's an issue with their liver, there's an issue with their kidneys, there's an issue with their brain, or whatever that thing is. They are physically addicted and they're going through withdrawals. And it's so important to realize exactly what you said. There is a consequence. Yeah. Even if we don't see it in the moment, we can't convince ourselves that there isn't. On January 23rd, 2021, everything changed for you and your family. Please tell us about that day, what happened, and how you remember it.
My mom has really good foresight. I remember her FaceTiming me. I was living in San Diego at the time. I was living with my Grammy and Bappa. After I got home from rehab in 2018, I was just tired of Scottsdale, Arizona. I wanted to get out. And so I was living in San Diego at the time. And I was on the phone with my mom, and she was like, this was something that she saw in Chase that could potentially lead to his death. And so she was telling me, like, he might die, Parker. I was like, no, I don't want to believe that. I think there's at least a sliver of him to be saved, but he's already done fentanyl once. Luckily, a dose not big enough to kill him. So he was very far gone by the time. And, going back to what you said about you think you're invincible because you haven't suffered the consequences yet. Chase thought he was this macho man and that he was protected, or not protected, but at least like quote unquote smart enough to avoid the instant consequences. But eventually, like, it caught up to him, and now he's dead. And so it was a normal day for me. It was in the evening that I got a FaceTime call from my mom. I was in the middle of, I used to stream on Twitch and play video games. So I was just streaming to my community, and I got a call from my mom. She said, Parker, your brother is dead. And so in the middle of my stream, I said, guys, I got to go. My brother just died. And I was on the phone with my mom. I rushed downstairs to meet my Grammy and my Bappa, and we were all in tears. I couldn't help but to just cry, but also say, like, Bappa, can you please pray right now? Can you please pray? That was the only response that I could give. And so it was devastating for all of us. And a part of me wants to feel guilty for being away from home in a completely far away place and not be with my immediate family right there. But I was where I was, and there's nothing that I could have done to change that. True. So I've accepted it for what it is. But it was a devastating moment for all of us. I'm glad that I had a friend and a girlfriend. His name was Sam. Her name was Sammy. We were kind of like a trio. I'm glad that they were there to quickly respond and come just be in the same presence as me and just and just help me just deal with the emotions right then and there. And the next day, my girlfriend and I, we went to Arizona to spend time at my mom's house for a week, and it was just, yeah, it was a very devastating moment. Just my heart sunk, and it's just, nobody prepares you for death, for loss. Sure, it's inevitable. We're human, we're finite, but we don't know when we die. Nobody teaches us, hey, there's going to be a day where you might lose someone in the snap of a finger when you least expect it, and nobody teaches you how to deal with those. I'll call them ground zero moments right now. I'm reading this book that my Bappa wrote about his experience at ground zero when he was a chaplain, and after the Twin Towers fell, he went out there to minister and to help people. And so I'm reading his book. It's called When Your World Falls Apart, and it's like life lessons from a ground zero chaplain. That was my ground zero moment, and it just felt like my heart was ripped out and torn into a million pieces. So yeah, I remember that day like it was yesterday. The emotions, if I were to really sit down and just like try to grab those emotions, they're still just as fresh as, how they were almost 4.5 years ago.
How old was he?
He was 18. I was 21.
So he was 18 years old.
18.
Now, you mentioned that he was really struggling at this point. You mentioned that your mom had said something about, you might lose him. Knowing all that, did it still surprise you when this happened, or was there part of you that was not surprised?
I would say it was not bittersweet, but there was this 50-50 of I didn't want to accept it for what it is, because I just wanted to be hopefully optimistic and think like, oh, sure, if I put my faith in God, it will work out. Because I was walking with the Lord at the time before I fell away again into more drug abuse. And part of me wanted to accept it for what it is. Like, yeah, he's going down a path where he's too far gone to the point where he can't be saved. And I don't know if what I'm about to say shows like, oh, I'm probably gaslighting myself into thinking like God has a reason for doing this, or if this is just the consequences of his actions. But I think because of how far gone he was, God didn't want to see the pain that it was inflicting on him and my family to fester and manifest even more, because that could have, tore the family apart even more. Because, after my parents' divorce, our whole family dynamic was just crumbling. And there was a lot of healing and a lot of reconciliation that needed to happen with that. And so I felt like if his problems were going to continue, it probably would have damaged us even more. So I think God was probably merciful to not let him go through much more pain. And so, sure, people can say, oh, you're just trying to make yourself feel good about it. But I don't know, where scripture says, like, where sin abounds, grace abounds even more. And so I definitely think that God was merciful unto my brother's soul and just wanted to take him home early. So
you mentioned earlier, you said he had already used fentanyl once. Mm-hmm. You made it sound like he was aware that he was using it. If I remember correctly, the day that he passed, didn't he buy a pressed pill? Was it a fake Xanax that he thought was Xanax, but it was fentanyl? What were the details on that? Because I might not have that correct.
I can't remember if it was Xanax or Percocets. I think it was Perks.
But it was a pressed pill.
It was a pressed pill, yeah. I don't know if he knew that one of those pills, the one that he took, was laced. I don't remember the report that the police department gave back to us. I've kind of been reluctant to really dig into that.
Understood.
Sure, like the day will come where I want to know every single detail, and my mom knows all of that, so I'll go to her about that. But yeah, I don't know if it was just that one pill, but it was just laced Percocets. It was just pressed pills, and he just wanted a quick fix to help him take a nap. And it was at my dad's parents' house where he took one laced pill, and that's all it took to kill him.
And that is all it takes. For those listening, if you're not familiar, whereas the lethal dose of heroin is 30 milligrams, The lethal dose of fentanyl is 2 to 3 milligrams for an average-sized adult male. To give you a visual representation of what that looks like, it looks like a couple little grains of table salt. It is absolutely tiny, and that is enough to kill someone. And it is very easy for cartels to buy fentanyl in bulk from Asia, to use machines to press it. And if they have a pill press, they can make it look like any pill they want. They can make it the right shape, the right color, the branded imprint. They can make it look like anything. And these fakes are very convincing to the point where when law enforcement sees them off the street, visually you can't tell whether or not this is real. They actually have to do a lab test on this. And if someone gets a pill where the mix wasn't done right, or etc., that's it. Game over at that point. And unfortunately, your family is not the only family that I've met that's gone through the situation. Not only are you not the only family that I've met that has lost a family member to this, I'm just talking about here in Arizona.
Yeah.
Like multiple people. And this is something where there's no margin for error at all.
Mm-mm. We're in an interesting place being right next to the Mexican border because, through 2021 to 25, we were in an administration where people could just come freely. Not to get political, but that's just how things work. People were to come and go as they please, and so it was very easy to bring any kind of contraband up through our border into our state. Like, not only is Arizona huge for child and sex trafficking, yes, but also like drug smuggling as well. Like, if you were to go down into Tucson, you'd probably run into a lot of that stuff there. So it's kind of interesting to kind of be in a hot spot for that place. And just, if you were to go off of, like the 50 or go further on the 51, not Union Hills, but, Van Buren, man, you're basically seeing people loaded up, practically corpses left and right down that street.
27th Avenue and Indian School.
Yep.
People nodding out, like bending, leaning forward, like passed out while standing up at the same time. I mean, it looks like a war zone.
It really does.
And it's reaching all states. We're not the only state being hit by it, but like you said, because of the border proximity, we are a primary hub for the Sinaloa cartel. Things get here first. They get here faster. They get here cheaper. They're not marked up by middlemen, like by the time they get to Chicago or somewhere like that. So, I mean, we are in the heart of it here. Yeah. So the loss of Chase, before I ask this question, you are 18 months sober, you're a year and a half?
Yeah, a year and a half.
So did that make you want to get sober? Did you try at that point? What made you decide to get sober? What was the end like for you? Or when you lost your brother, did your use increase as a way to try to cope with that?
This is my second round of being sober. I spent another year and a half when I was 19, and then I turned 21, and this was prime COVID, and I was just locked up in my room, didn't really do much. My work allowed me to take 2 months off, and so I was bored. I was depressed, and that's where I met my girlfriend at the time, and it was another form of like not peer pressure, but social acceptance to drink again. So it was gradual. It just was drinking, and then I can't remember. Yeah, no, this was 2020. And so after my brother died, then I just tunneled back into drug abuse, because what happened is after his death, like, sure, I was drinking like every now and then at the time, and I had a solid relationship with God, but also what they don't teach in the church is like, how do you respond to moments like these too? I wish I could have known like how to trust in God and knowing his purpose for that. Like, sure, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. Okay, what does that mean now that my brother is dead, God? Like, it wasn't more so like give thanks under all circumstances, like 1 Thessalonians 5:16 says. It was more so me shaking my fist in the air, like, come on. Like, why would such a gracious God do something like this to our family? Why would he allow these things? And I know that's a huge argument that a lot of people who don't believe in God use to kind of debunk his graciousness. And I just wish I was taught, what is the proper response? And so that kind of really disrupted my relationship with the Lord. And at the time, I was, still DJing, making music and stuff. I didn't do anything with my career. Sure, I was like putting out music on Spotify and SoundCloud. But at the end of 2021, I found these guys who wanted to start a collective, and we did that. We started streaming on Twitch to like 8 viewers, and we started doing like beach pop-up shows, and our first official show, ticketed show, was at a wine bar. Be in mind, the kind of music that I liked was called dubstep. Mm-hmm. It's rooted from reggae and UK garage that kind of just like meshed together in like the early 2000s, came out of like Bristol and South London. And so people like Skrillex, who really made it much more like, if you were to think of like Transformers and hear all those sounds and put it together with a drum loop, that's what you get out of it. It's very aggressive music, not the kind of music to be played in a wine bar where you hear like jazz or some very light jazz or whatever. Besides that, so yeah, like that was the quote unquote start of my career as a performer, as a DJ and a music producer, because next thing you know, we're selling out venues. We had a residency at a club in downtown San Diego, and I was playing as much as I could because it was like the culmination of waiting for all these years to want to do the thing that I've been doing for so long in my bedroom, from like 14 to 22 was when that happened. So obviously, like I had my fair share of the rave scene when I was like 18, 19, because I was going to raves. I wasn't playing the music or anything, but I knew what the scene was like. I knew what kind of drugs were being passed around, and I knew what kind of activities there was. But yet, I was so reluctant to abstain from that because there was a lot of undealt grief and pain that I haven't really worked through, that I made manifest through drug and alcohol abuse again. And, sure, like when I was 18, 19, I was doing cocaine, but then ketamine became a really big party drug, especially in the rave scene. And so when I was 22 in the rave scene, playing shows and stuff, I'd be doing both cocaine and ketamine. And here's the thing, like, for some reason I'm alive. This was still in the middle of like fentanyl in its prime, where it was so common. I don't know how I didn't end up with a bad batch, because every other weekend I was, putting something up my nose, and it, like you just described, like if you were to take a look at the tip of a pencil, that's the amount of fentanyl it will take to kill you. That's it. Which really isn't a lot. And so the fact that I'm still here, despite like, I was playing Russian roulette with myself, that's crazy. So obviously glory to God for that. And I'm grateful that he has a plan for me. But it really did get worse because of my brother's death. And more, I just tried to sedate myself because I was angry at the world. I was angry at everyone. All I wanted to do was just to self-satisfy, self-fulfill. And so, the music industry as well, very self-centered as well. It's a game, and everyone's just in it for themselves. So I kind of learned how to put up these boundaries and pretend to make relationships, but instead I was just getting anything out of anyone. And that's also what addiction does to people. It turns you into a manipulator. It turns you into this sly person trying to get something out of someone to fuel your own addiction. So yeah, it definitely got worse as I was, finally quote unquote fulfilling my childhood passions, and, also mixed with the pain of grief and loss.
How did that come to an end? What got you sober where you are now 18 months? What helped you get sober? What keeps you sober? Why did you make that decision again? And why has it stuck for 18 months this time?
Well, it took me a little bit of being on the fence to actually make up my mind of what I want. So it was towards the end it was like December of 2022. I was in this, do you know the show New Girl? Mm-hmm. I was in this New Girl situation where instead I was one guy living with 4 girls because I didn't really have anywhere else to go. I got kicked out of my grandparents' house because they saw what I was going through, and they were like, they've given me many chances, but I was too stubborn. And so I was just there. I got fired from my job working at this restaurant in Del Mar, and I was just spending my money on weed, on alcohol, on drugs, and just partying all the time. And so I couldn't afford to live there. And my dad came and rescued me. He brought a truck and he helped me pack all my stuff up. And then I moved back to his house in December of 2022. And so the year 2023 was a very weird year for me because subconsciously I was very reluctant to be in the state of being that I was finally being back home in Arizona when I wanted to get out of there and be in San Diego. I love San Diego. It's my favorite city. I wish I could go there more as I used to be, but I'm here for now. But yeah, I didn't want to be back in Arizona. I didn't want to be pulled away from the collective that me and my friends formed, because we started from nothing and made it into something. Like, we were bringing around talent from all over the country and selling out venues. Like, we had a thing going on, and like I was somebody who was known. I had many followers on Instagram. I had the status, and people knew me for that one guy on stage who plays the fun music that people dance to. So I had to leave all of that behind, and I was not happy about that. I was not happy to be back under the restrictions and the confinement of my parents' wings. But it was a blessing all around to be back with my family. The fact that my dad was the fact that my dad wanted to go out and get me the same way, shout out to the dads out there too. Like, the fact that my dad took the effort to go out where I was to meet me halfway to bring me back home, that really does say something. Going back to what I said about the parable of the prodigal son, that as the son recognized what he was doing was wrong, he went back to his dad's house, and the dad saw him, and he ran to the son and met him halfway. They had a loving embrace and saying, "Welcome home." And so that's what my dad did. He saw where I was at in this sorry state of depression, anxiety, drug abuse. You could see hardly any life behind my eyes at all. He rescued me. So it was definitely God working through him to do that. But that whole year of 2023 was really weird because I was still drinking. I was still smoking weed, and I tried getting involved in the local EDM scene here in Phoenix and Scottsdale. It was a lot more toxic than it was in San Diego. And so I, definitely dipped my toes in that water and was, still, doing coke and ketamine. And, but I stayed away from the psychedelics because that just messed up my mind like crazy. And so what kind of led me to realizing is this really good for me? I was at Flagstaff, and I was playing at this Renegade rave in the middle of the forest, and my set wasn't until 4 a.m., and I hardly even knew anyone. So I was there just questioning my decisions, is this really worth it? Is it really worth it just to play for 45 minutes in the middle of a forest when you know nobody? Is it really worth it just to get your reps in on performing? And I was like, no. So, that was also the influence of being around my family again, because after Chase died, God really made himself known to my family. My dad and my stepmom, my mom, they were all growing closer with him. So God brought us closer to him through this unfortunate circumstance of grief. But there's, like I said, there's pain, there's purpose behind the pain. So there is also just the scripture and the word getting floated around me as I was, living with my parents again. And so, eventually I just came to my senses. Is it really worth it? You've done this once, and you've seen what sobriety is like. You've seen what it is like on the other side, being free and released from these shackles that bind you. Cause that's what addiction is. It's I always think of the cartoons of, the prisoners that have that big chain ball that's dragging them along, and it's just it's a weight. So I've experienced that weight being lifted once. So why did I go back into the thing that I was a slave to already? So I made up my mind, and I was like, if this is also a genetic thing, I shouldn't be entertaining it, because and what really brought me to my senses, I went to Impact Church off of Scottsdale Road, and I went to the young adults group. And what really captivated me was the fact that like it was such a huge young adults ministry that it had like, I think I remember like 500 kids or 500 people my age going to that one service. So I was like, wow, there's something happening within my age group. And the sermon that just brought me to my knees and brought me to the altar was, it can end with you. It can end with you. All the pain, all the addiction, all the things that have been generational that the enemy is trying to use to tear you apart, it can end with you. And so that's what I want. I don't want my kids to experience the same pain that I suffered through with, drugs taking the life of my brother, through alcoholism really messing up my dad. And it's just, like I said, sin likes to make itself look attractive, but there's so many consequences behind it. And so being in the midst of all those consequences, I've had enough. And so that's when I reestablished my faith in Jesus once again. It was right before my brother's heavenly birthday. I think it was like October 26th, 2023. So I reestablished my faith in the Lord. But sanctification is a slow process.
It is.
For good reason.
It takes time.
For good reason. And so it was December 4th, 2023, where I was like, you know what, I'm going to stop drinking all around. Sure, I can say it as much as I want that, I can handle it. No, you can't. You have a problem. So since then, it has been a great turnaround. There has been a lot of healing that came from it, knowing that like this is a decision that I made on my own behalf. Sure, my parents came to me when I was 19 and said, Parker, we're going to send you to this place and we're going to get you clean. Sure, I somewhat obeyed that, but I was still, again, reluctant and very facetious in how I responded to that. So, but since this is on my own volition, it's like there's so much empowerment behind that, and there's so much freedom that I've experienced in these past 18 months of living in sobriety, living in this healing process that I should have went through when I was 21 or when I was 19, and then when I was 21 as well. So really just barreling through the tough process that not a lot of people want to go through, which is grief. Going through that has really allowed me to just, I don't know, live in freedom. That's the best way I can describe it.
It sounds like when you talked about that young adult ministry and there were 500 people there, and we said earlier, we used the phrase when you thought you found your people, whether it was you had certain substances in common, or whether it was EDM or whatever, you found your people. We said that phrase earlier at some point in this conversation. Yeah. And it sounds like when you went to that, it sounds like, no, you found your people. Mm-hmm. Like you found the genuine connection. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of earlier, you talked about there was places where you felt seen and you felt accepted. Mm-hmm. You felt seen and accepted there, but the difference this time is that's genuine. It's real. It's not that empty counterfeit that life gives you.
Exactly.
Because you talked earlier about not only the substances or the self-injury, but you talked about relationships. Mm-hmm. Any of those things, whether it's sex, it's money, it's food, it's gambling, all of those things are the things that we try to use, that they're the world's counterfeit, where there is a genuine thing that we're trying to get the cheap and quick and fast version of. But where it doesn't do for us what God can do for us, what true healing and true recovery can do for us.
Agreed.
Something I really liked is your dad came to get you, and even though you were already legally an adult, you're a young adult, when you're telling me that, I could tell that it meant a lot to you.
It did.
A lot of parents discount the amount of influence or input or strength that they have in their child's life. They're like, oh, once they're a teenager, they don't care about what I have to say. They care more about their friends. Yes, they do begin to care more about what peers say and less about parents. That's that gaining independence. Yeah. That's normal. We need to not, as parents, for those of you out there who are parents, don't discount the influence and the positive effect that you can have on your kids when they're teens, or even in your case, you are a young adult. Yeah. Obviously, your dad coming in to do that made an impact on you. Mm-hmm. And, that isn't exactly where your new sober date started, but it was the beginning of that process, it sounded like.
Yeah.
So what would your message be to someone hearing this right now who is in the midst of their own substance use struggle, maybe one similar to yours? What would you tell that person right now?
These things that may look attractive on the outside are only superficial, meaning that there is no substance in the deeper meaning behind using it. Like I said, sin likes to make itself look attractive, and God wants us to live a life that, makes us strive and work towards righteousness, towards perfection. And the results may not come right away, but when they do, it's so much more gratifying than what we try to find right in the moment. We live in a society of quick fixes left and right of us. And that's not what life is about, because, life is hard. I think it says a lot about an individual, how they respond to the challenges life throws at them. And so getting wrapped up in addiction, I understand that it may look like it's healing something. It may look like it's solving problems, but in reality, it's creating a God-sized hole that only God can fill himself. There's no heart in the substances that we're chained to. The only heart that produces any kind of long-lasting good feeling is the heart of Jesus himself. And to those that may not know Jesus, I really recommend just reading the scriptures. I really recommend reading the gospel and understanding the heart and the character of God, because it's easy to say, oh, I'm going through this because God has dealt with me bitterly. No, there are actions to your consequences. We live in a world of cause and effect. That's reality. It's reality. But that doesn't mean I don't sympathize with those who are going through something right now. So if you're also caught up in addiction, just know that you're seen. Know that there are people who care for you and want to be there, walk and do life with you.
Absolutely.
I think that is one of the reasons why I am where I'm at today, is because I found people who wanted to do life with me. Sure, when I only went to Impact Church for a couple months because it's in the heart of Scottsdale. There's something weird about Scottsdale that growing up, like you've seen, I'm such an outlier to the city. And so I go to a different church now, but that's where I found my true people.
That's where it started.
That's where it started. You need to find your people. You need to find people who can look at the state that you're in and say it for what it is. Scripture says, the faithful are the wounds of a friend. And it also says, better is open rebuke than hidden love. I would not want friends who saw me in this sorry state that I used to be in and say, oh, it's fine, Parker. I would want friends who would call me out for the mistakes that I'm making and saying, you need to get right. You need to get clean. You need to get right with God, and you need to get right with yourself too. Because a lot of what addiction is not being right with yourself too. There's this disagreement that you're having with yourself. And so obviously God made you with a plan, and God made you with purpose, and he made you in his image out of love that surpasses all understanding. So there's a reason why you're here, and there's a reason why you're going through what you're going through. And last thing I'll say is I love Proverbs 17:3. I just love the book of Proverbs. I say that a proverb a day keeps the stupid away. And so Proverbs 17:3 says, the crucible is for silver and the furnace is for gold, and the Lord tests hearts. Super confusing on a superficial level, I know, but what happens when you put a material like silver and gold in such intense heat? It starts to melt, and all those imperfections within the material start to rise up out of its liquidated form and burn, evaporate, whatever.
It's a refining process.
It's a refining process. So what happens when you look into that metal as it's cooling? You get to see a reflection of yourself. And that's what God is doing within our hearts, is when he puts us through the trials, when he's putting us through the furnace of the fiery furnace of life and of tribulation. What he's doing, he's making you go through a refinement process, so that when he looks into the furnace of our hearts, he sees a reflection of himself. So that's why sanctification is a daunting process. That is why people want to run away from doing the hard thing, which is getting right. And so, just know that you're here for a purpose, and there is purpose behind the pain that you're going through. Sure, you may not accept it to be painful because obviously it's a quick fix, but once you start being honest with yourself, then you'll come to the senses of it. So there is hope in conclusion.
Your answer to this question might be tied into the answer that you just gave in the last question. But what would your message be to anyone hearing this who is dealing with loss, dealing with grief, the loss of a loved one, be it a sibling, a child, a spouse, a parent, or anyone else? What would your advice or encouragement be to them?
Do not keep it to yourself. Do not find a turtle shell or a hermit crab shell to just hide in. That is what the devil wants you to do. He wants you to just take it and just let it consume you. We don't need to be encapsulated by grief alone. There is a reason why we have people. Humans are like every other species. We're herd animals. We need people. If you were to be driving down the 17 at 5 p.m., you really like to see that people like to be herd people. There are people who are waiting for you to reach out to them, to bring these pains, these burdens to them, because you'd be surprised that there are people out there who want to help you go through this. So
absolutely,
that is my biggest piece of advice, is like, you have to communicate what you're going through. You have to communicate your feelings. You got to communicate what actions you're doing to cope with it. Otherwise, if you're just siloing yourself, that's when the pain will never go away. And sure, this is a common saying to those who are dealing with grief. Like, the grief doesn't get smaller, but you get bigger. You grow around the grief. But in those early stages of it, it's important to really seek community, to really seek fellowship with one another, especially those who've hopefully gone through the same thing. And I don't say hopefully with like a positive connotation, because obviously it's a terrible thing to go through.
But it gives them the empathy.
Exactly. Find those who empathize with you.
And that's something that you in a nutshell, something that I always mention when I share my story is, don't fight your battles alone.
Yeah.
And if you do go to someone and you are venting or opening up to them and they don't help you, or they don't take you seriously, or don't meet you where you're at, that's not about you. That's about them. Yeah. Don't give up. It's frustrating if that happens, but go to the next person or the next person until you get the support and the help that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So what is life like for you today? What is important to you? What do you want your future to look like?
Well, honestly, I went from being someone who was on stage and was a somebody to now I'm kind of a nobody, and I'm totally fine with it being that way.
You're at peace.
I am at peace with just who God has made me to be. And, it says in Philippians 2 to count others as more significant than yourself. And I think that is really the antidote to selfishness and bitterness, because addiction is a form of selfishness. And so really being able to just look at others and figure out how you can be of service to other people is a lot more fulfilling than anything that we try to do for ourselves. So I'm not really doing much right now in life. Like, sure, I work an average 9 to 5. I'm in digital marketing and I work for a supplemental company, like whoop-de-doo. Sure, I'm a homeowner. I have a mortgage, and I'm kind of living a basic life. But, there is just so much more opportunity for me to, look at what I'm doing and figure out, how can I do this for someone else? How can I do this for someone who's struggling? How can I just be of service to other people? And, living in such a way of being selfless and in humility has, brought me so much fulfillment to all the puzzle pieces that I've been trying to look for. And so like, even with the whole EDM thing, like I stopped listening to like 90% of electronic music because a lot of that is just very like drug enticing. Sure, there's plenty of good groups out there. I love Massive Attack. I just got into them recently. Who else? Like The Prodigy. There's also this like genre called like Future Garage. That's kind of like a mix of like UK garage, but a little bit more chiller focus. Like, sure, I love electronic music.
Massive Attacks Mezzanine, by the way. Go check it out.
Yes, very good album indeed. There's plenty of good groups out there. That's not necessarily like it's music to be played at parties. Like it's an art form, obviously. But I don't really listen to that much anymore. Like I gave up the whole DJ thing, and what I'm trying to pursue now is like pastoral leadership. Like I would love to have a church and to be a shepherd of God's people, because I've seen what it looks like when people have come for me to shepherd me, to bring me into the right place, and I want to be able to do the same. And I love the scriptures. People say like, Parker, how do you have like such good memory of the scriptures? It's because like it's what keeps me upright. It's if I did not have God in my life, if I did not have the atoning blood of Jesus on the cross, I would not be where I'm at right now, which is living in freedom, living in healing, most importantly, and living with purpose as well. So yeah, pretty average life, but at the same time, like I'm not complaining about where I'm at right now. And so I can't say with confidence that there's not going to be any more problems, because that's just part of life. There will be times where my addictive personality is like, go get a beer at the bar, turn it into 12 beers. Or maybe it wouldn't hurt if you were to try smoking weed again. Like obviously the temptations will come.
That's normal.
It is normal. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's important, again, to just, find community who can help you and keep you accountable as well. I got some accountability partners in my life, and I got some younger guys that I help hold accountable, and it's just really good, and it keeps me in check as well.
Absolutely, it does.
And so, yeah, I would say that when you're just living for other people, it really helps you keep yourself in check as well, because obviously nobody's going to listen to you if you're going to say one thing but still live in addiction, live in sin. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
And like we said, having that thought is normal. Boy, that beer looks good, or I smoking some weed right now sounds good. Mm-hmm. That's a normal thought to have as someone in recovery. What matters is, what do you then do next? Exactly. Like you said, you have your accountability people. You can give someone a call. You go outside. You change your environment. You do something so that you're not obsessing over and focusing on it.
Yeah.
And it's important for those listening who are in recovery or who want to be in recovery to have a plan. Don't wait until that moment of temptation and pressure to go, oh, what do I do now? Because you're more likely to obsess over that thought and give into that thought. Whereas if you have a plan, oh, when I feel this way, this is what I do. I call this person, I go to the gym, I take my dog for a walk, whatever it is, you're more likely to follow the plan and not fall back into those old habits. You also said one more thing before we wrap up I want to highlight. You said, I have a pretty normal life right now. You said, you used to be part of the collective where you were performing and you were at these venues and it was like you were somebody. That was the phrase that you used. And you said, now it's, you're living a fairly simple life, but you're still serving others. And that's what I want people to recognize. Your 9 to 5 is what pays your bills. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be your 9 to 5 what gives you purpose. Mm-hmm. You obviously get purpose from the people that you mentor and the people that you uplift. And I want people hearing this to understand this. We all need a sense of purpose. We all need, when we go to bed at night, to say, what I did today mattered. If you're fortunate enough, it can be what job that you're in. It can be your career field. And if that ties into your sense of purpose, great. You've got a built-in sense of purpose. It doesn't have to be your job. What you're doing with the digital marketing and things like that, that's your job. But what you're finding purpose in, obviously, is you're talking about mentoring people, sharing your experience and things like that. I encourage anyone listening, you don't even have to be a person in recovery. Just as a regular human being, we all need to feel a sense of what I do matters. Otherwise, that emptiness, we will try to fulfill that in other ways. So ending with this, is there anything else you'd like to add or anything I may have overlooked?
Right now, I don't think so. Well, first I want to just bounce off of what you said about about your workplace. Sure, it's not the monetary value that I bring home with me at my job. It's the fact that I get to just be of service. That is the fulfillment that we're made for. So for those who are kind of feeling stuck of where they're at right now, like I have a term that like grow where you're planted. You can replant, you could put a plant in a different pot. But as of now, there's a reason why you're there. And so I guess closing thoughts on my end, where you are right now is for a purpose. I love Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. I know that's Christianity 101, but when you really start meditating on that and understand that, if you were to look at characters in the Bible like Job, who lost everything, his whole family, his friend group, he was just a subject of torment.
If you think you're having a bad day, read that book.
Yeah, if
you are not having a bad day.
If you can't meet your deadlines in the office, take a look at Job. He's probably up in heaven shaking his head right now. Like, this dude does not know what he's going through.
You're mad because you got stuck in traffic. Your Starbucks order was wrong, and Job is looking down at you saying, really?
Yeah. No, that's probably not how he's doing it. But, I would just be also mindful of, how am I responding to everyday situations in life? It's not how am I reacting? If you're only living life based off of feelings, then you are only going to trap yourself into what feels good. Thoughts create feelings, and feelings create actions and motives. And so if we allow ourselves to be masters of our thoughts, then I think that we will be able to make much wiser decisions rather than just being led by feelings. And so feelings are good to have, but use them to serve others. And ultimately, the best feeling that you can receive is the everlasting love of Jesus Christ, who died on the cross to free you from your addiction. There's nothing that he cannot do to save you from it. And so if you're asking, why hasn't he done it already? Have you asked him to? That I will say. So, I'm just very grateful to be on the show with you, Shane, and thank you for allowing me to just speak of just life and, just for those who are listening who are struggling or know those who are struggling, seriously, share this message with them, share this episode with them, because you'd be surprised you're not alone in this. And so, I will say that as a form of encouragement, and we're here for you. We're here for you.
Once again, our guest today is Parker Ellison. Parker, thank you so much for coming and sharing your time, your experience, your strength, your hope. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks once again to our guest, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it on social media and with your personal network. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, or would like to suggest a guest or topic for a future episode, please email us at podcast@silverladder.com. If you need resources related to mental health support or treatment, please visit silverladder.com and select Resources from the toolbar menu. And finally, if you have questions about or are interested in setting up a presentation, consulting, peer support, or family support services, please email contact@silverladder.com. Please note that Silver Ladder is not a crisis resource and is not staffed or monitored 24/7. Thank you for listening to Silver Ladder.